Well, here it is. The top 10 that every Pokemon YouTuber must eventually do. And I have to say, I can't think of a better way to wrap up Pokemonth. The Pokemon franchise has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember, and above all else, the Pokemon themselves are my favorite thing about it. As of Generation 6, there are over 700 of these guys to choose from, so this is definitely one of the harder countdowns I've had to make. So before we get into the official list, I'd like to give out some honorable mentions. Gligar and Gliscor, Aggron, Excadrill, Scyther, Electabuzz, Hawlucha, and Psyduck. See how long that list was? That just goes to show how hard it was to make this video. Now, with that out of the way, I present to you my top 10 favorite Pokemon of all time. Enjoy, everybody! Kicking off this countdown, we have what is undoubtedly the most iconic cat Pokemon of them all, Meowth. In terms of its design, Meowth is rather simplistic, which kinda complements its normal typing, but I always found that simplicity to be very appealing. The part of its design that really stood out to me was the golden charm on its forehead. Also the fact that its whiskers kinda look like they're part of its flesh. Now when it comes to battling, Meowth isn't something I would particularly use, but it can learn a multitude of crazy attacks one may not think such a normal looking cat could learn. Gunk Shot, Seed Bomb, Dark Pulse, Hypnosis, Dream Eater, Water Gun, Bubble Beam, as well as the only move that gives you money. But the primary reason Meowth is on this list is because of what made it such an iconic Pokemon in the first place. Its role in the anime. Team Rocket's Meowth is one of my favorite characters on the show, as well as one of the more relatable Pokemon, given his intelligence and his ability to talk. What also makes Meowth an interesting character is that he has a philosophical side to him, best shown off in the Japanese ending, Meowth's Song, which is a really beautiful song whether you understand what Meowth is saying or not. However, what I love best about Meowth is his voice. This is where things start to get a little sappy. His most prominent voice actor, the late Maddie Blaustein, really put her heart and soul into the character, and I would always do my Meowth impressions, or any impression for that matter, with as much enthusiasm as her. I really respected her for that, and had she not voiced Meowth, my opinion on the Pokemon might be a bit different. But as it stands, Meowth is an amusing little Pokemon that's given me a lot of great childhood memories to look back on. That's more than enough to get on a countdown like this, wouldn't you say? It may seem a bit cliche to like Pikachu this much, but everybody has their own reasons for liking a Pokemon, no matter how overrated it may be. I mean, yeah, there are times when it gets on my nerves, specifically on the marketing side of things, but overall, I really do like it. And yes, its stats are nothing to write home about, but being the face of the franchise, Pikachu gets a lot of special treatment, which has made it a really interesting and fun Pokemon to use throughout the series. There are some Pikachu that can surf, there are some that can fly, it has a held item that doubles its attack stats, which if held while breeding, gives the offspring a devastating exclusive move to abuse, and my personal favorite, bringing one over from your Gen 1 games to Pokemon Stadium brings it to life, giving it unique animations and its voice straight from the anime. Speaking of which, Ash's Pikachu is another reason I like the Pokemon so much. Yes, it's ridiculously overpowered, and said power's so inconsistent it makes me want to punch a hole in the wall, but personality-wise, I don't have an issue with it, and I really do like the bond that he and Ash share. It's as if they've known each other for a really long time, despite the fact that Ash is still 10 after almost 20 years. Still, you gotta admit, that's a pretty good bond for less than 12 months. On the spin-off side of things, Pikachu has been one of my mains in every iteration of Smash Bros. Thus far, and when the new one comes out, you bet I'll be using him once more. Oh, and how could I possibly forget? I myself am a Pikachu! While it may not necessarily be the first thing that comes to mind when I think fire type, Magmar is one of the best examples of what that type is all about. Many of its Pokédex entries talk about its elusiveness and how it's a living embodiment of fire itself. Those two factors alone are what make Magmar so interesting to me. In Pokemon X and Y, I managed to find myself a shiny Magmar, my first wild shiny in nearly a decade. But my best experience with Magmar was in Pokemon Heart Gold, where I caught myself one early on in my journey. His name was Pyrax, and he proved to be a major powerhouse on my team, being a mainstay right up until the final battle with Red. And while its evolution Magmortar is a lot stronger and a lot more versatile, I'm not too fond of its design, especially when compared to Magmar's. The arm cannons are nice, I'll give it that, but Magmortar loses a lot of what Magmar had going for it. And personally, I think Magmortar looks like a giant Easter egg. Whereas with Magmar's design, I think they really nailed it, in turn making one of the most memorable and creative looking Pokemon of the first generation. When it comes to starter Pokemon, I've always had a really hard time choosing which one to take at the beginning of the game. This is especially true for the Kanto starters, and I tried really hard to put just one on this list, but that's not happening. As a result, this entry is a tie between the three of them, specifically Bulbasaur, Charizard, and Squirtle. Some of you may find this lineup to be a little familiar, and there is a reason for that, because it's the same lineup of Pokemon that good old Ash Ketchum had throughout most of Kanto and Johto. Now you see, I was introduced to Pokemon through the anime, and I watched it at every single chance I got, and of all the starters' evolutionary forms, Bulbasaur, Charizard, and Squirtle were the ones I saw the most often, and they soon became my favorites of each of their respective families. I still remember just how excited me and my brother were when we saw moments like Bulbasaur using Solar Beam, Squirtle learning Hydro Pump, and Charizard taking on Blaine's Magmar at the top of the volcano and winning by using the seemingly devastating Seismic Toss. That was so awesome! But my love for these Pokemon isn't anime exclusive. I always try to get all three in the games, but there's hardly ever been a time where Bulbasaur wasn't my first choice. Apart from Grass being one of my favorite types, most people either went for Charmander or Squirtle, so I decided to do things a little differently. And that really paid off, because if you chose Bulbasaur, half of the gyms in Kanto are a breeze. I could go on and on about my affinity for these three, but let's move on to a Pokemon you may be shocked to find I like even more. Wait for it. Wait, hold on.
Wobbuffet!
Ha ha! Yes, indeed. Wobbuffet has got to be the most intentionally funny Pokemon that I've come to know. From its jagged smile, to its four stubby feet, to the fact that it's partially based on a real-life comedian, there isn't a thing about it that doesn't amuse me. In the anime, it was such an upgrade from Jesse's relatively dull Lickitung, and it quickly became one of my favorite things about the show. It's actually one of the few reasons I kept watching the show after most of the English voice cast was replaced. While everybody else sounded radically different, Wobbuffet was still the same old guy. And while it does serve as the show's comedy relief, when it uses counter or mirror code, the aftermath is usually no laughing matter. At first, I thought the anime was just exaggerating its power, like they did with Seismic Toss, but actually, it only touched upon what this blue blob is capable of. With its insane bulk, unique move pool, and shadow tag ability, Wobbuffet can prove to be a real threat. It's so good, in fact, it was banned from tournaments at a point, making it one of the few non-legendary Pokemon to have that happen to them. And if you're unfortunate enough to run into a Wobbuffet during an XY Nuzlocke and don't have something that can one-hit KO it, or run away from it, one of your teammates is going to die. Recently, I've been using Wobbuffet quite a bit online, and it's an absolute joy to use. And I decided to nickname him Wobbuffet! Not very original, but it couldn't be more fitting. Back in Generation 1, bug types posed little to no threat. Then in Gen 2, a pair of bug type Pokemon came along and showed that even insects had the potential to wreck shop. And my favorite of the two, as well as my favorite bug type overall, is Heracross. When playing through Silver the first time, I really wanted to make Heracross a part of my team. Only problem was, I didn't know where to look for one. No in-game trainers had a Heracross, so I couldn't look it up in the dex to see where to find one, but that wouldn't have helped me anyways. Heracross can only be found by headbutting trees, and the Pokédex didn't cover Pokemon that lived in trees for some reason. Not to mention, Heracross is a pretty rare Pokemon to begin with, so I missed out on a really good Pokemon back then. But I more than made up for it in Heart Gold, where Heracross got even better. With a moveset of Close Combat, Aerial Ace, Brick Break, and Mega Horn coupled with a Good Nature and Guts ability, this Heracross was a vital asset to my team, and had nearly every member of the Elite Four running for the hills. Though like most Pokemon on this list, I first learned of Heracross through the anime. And the one that Ash has is a shining example of what all Heracross should aspire to be. It also gets bonus points for being very adorable. First impressions are very important, and I gotta say, Donphan made a very good one on me. Back when I used to think there were only 150-ish Pokemon, it came as a legitimate surprise when I first saw Donphan in the first movie. Even though I knew next to nothing about it and it was only on screen for about a minute, it instantly became one of my favorites. When Johto rolled around and Ash caught a Phanpy, I had no idea what it evolved into, so when I looked it up, I was overjoyed to discover that its evolved form was the Cool Tire Elephant Pokemon from Mewtwo Mewtwo Strikes Back, as I called it back then. Save for its speed, Donphan's everything I could ever want out of a ground type, with great physical stats and a move pool that takes full advantage of it. However, my current Donphan does things a little bit differently when it comes to battling. He's more of a troll. When up against a physical sweeper, he'll use Scary Face to lower their speed a bit, and then use Charm to lower their attack. When this actually works out in my favor, it can be frustrating for my opponent. I've shut down my brother's Mega Gyarados a few times with this strategy. I decided to nickname my Donphan Ban Ban because I caught it as a Fanpy and I thought the name was really cute. Now it's just kinda funny. Here we have two of the most iconic legends of the Pokemon world, tying at number 3. While it was difficult choosing between the 3 starters, it was even harder choosing between Hooh and Lugia. And why is that, you may ask? I mean, there's one less Pokemon to deal with. Well, with the starters, you generally only get to pick one, and you won't be able to get the rest without trading with someone else. That's not really the case with Lugia and Hooh. What I mean is, these two can be caught in both versions of their games, despite what the box art may lead you to believe. Though depending on what version you have, they'll be at different levels, and they'll have different advantages because of that. This is just one of the many reasons I could never choose one over the other. And when I thought of things that one Pokemon had that the other didn't, well, the other one managed to have something that brought it back up to an equal level. For example, Hooh was one of the first Pokemon I ever saw, though it was only for a few seconds, whereas Lugia got his own movie. Even though that Lugia was a bit of a pushover, but Lugia was also the mascot of Silver, the first Pokemon game I ever played. But as mentioned, Hooh's in the game too, and I managed to get mine in a Great Ball without saving beforehand, while it was badly poisoned, I might add. But since this Hooh was at level 70, it didn't know its signature move, whereas Lugia did. And back in Gen 2, I thought that Aeroblast just looked and sounded a lot cooler than Sacred Fire. And do I even have to talk about Shadow Lugia? That was like a Pokemon fanfic brought to fruition and was the main selling point of XD for me. Though while an Evil Lugia was cool, Hooh's sense of purity is something I've always admired. And for as many differences as these two have, they also share a lot of great stuff in common. So much, in fact, I used to think that Hooh and Lugia were one and the same, a single entity of the very concept of legend. Putting just one of these guys on my list is, oddly enough, doing a disservice to the both of them. Not only are they an amazing duo, they're my favorite Pokemon from the land of Johto. Alright, you may think I'm starting to cop out a bit, what with this being the third entry with more than one Pokemon on it, but again, allow me to justify my reasoning here. Remember how I said Hooh and Lugia are so similar it's as if they're the same Pokemon? Well, Mewtwo and Muse share the same DNA and practically are the same Pokemon, so... technicality? But unlike Hooh and Lugia, these two aren't as homogenous, though they do share a couple of things in common. A notable example being that they were in fact the very first Pokemon I ever laid eyes on. And much like Donphan, these two instantly resonated with me. Let's talk about Mew first. One of the things I love about the Pokemon series are the many mysteries of its world, and Mew is mystery incarnate. Ever since I first learned about it, Mew has been the most intriguing Pokemon to me, and I've always wanted to get my own. Unfortunately, I missed out on every Wi-Fi distribution for Mew, and I never knew about the in-store events back when I was little. I was gonna make a joke about how they never came to Canada, but apparently they did. Quite a lot, actually. But when I first played Yellow, I heard a rumor that Mew could be found in the game through a now famous glitch, which I brushed aside as fake. If Mew wasn't under that truck, he wasn't anywhere in the game, I thought. Thankfully, the glitch turned out to be real, and catching Mew was not only one of my happiest moments playing Pokemon, but a game in general. And in the subsequent games where I couldn't get Mew, I settled for the next best thing, which is arguably even better. Mewtwo was the big bad back in the day, and was the one Pokemon that everybody wanted. It may not be able to learn every move its counterpart can, but with stats like these, thank your lucky stars it can't. When I got Mewtwo Strikes Back on video, not only did I witness the Mew duo in action for the first time, but I also got a free Mewtwo card, which I cherished right up until the moment I lost it, and I wish I could find it. Mewtwo became a little less relevant after Pokemania died down, but I still liked it a great deal. And when Gen 6 was on the horizon, much to my surprise, Mewtwo got a lot of special treatment. It was the first Pokemon shown to be able to Mega Evolve before we even knew about Mega Evolution. It ended up getting another Mega Evolution. It got a big role in a new movie. Actually, no, that was pretty bad. But Mewtwo's role in Origins almost made up for that, where it was portrayed right down to a T. And I almost lost my mind when it didn't speak, but rather let out this spine-chilling snarl. It truly sounded like the ruthless monster it's said to be. Now, I was really considering whether these two should take the #1 spot, but I ultimately decided against it as it didn't seem fair. So, what is my favorite Pokemon of them all? Ladies and gentlemen, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. Now's the time to see what Pokemon I think is the very best, the one that tops all the rest. Hailing from the Hoenn region, we have the one, the only, the versatile, the agile, Sceptile. After Gen 2, I took a little break from Pokemon, and I was starting to think I was getting too old for the series. Keep in mind, I was in the 3rd grade when this went through my head. About 2 weeks later, I came crawling back, and when I tuned into the show, I noticed that Ash had an unfamiliar Pokemon. That Pokemon was Trico, and sure enough, it began to grow on me. It had an awesome design, a level-headed attitude, and he always sported a stick in his mouth, which not only made him look cooler, but also gave him a bit more individuality. It didn't take too long before he became my favorite of Ash's Hoenn team, and when he eventually evolved into Sceptile, things only got better from there. Notably during the Sinnoh League, where Sceptile made a surprise appearance and took out Tobias's Darkrai with a single Leaf Blade. And for Sceptile to be the only Pokemon ever to defeat said Darkrai, well, that was just icing on the cake. And now, we come to my Sceptile, who I've talked about a number of times before. Though he wasn't my very first starter, he is the one I've had the strongest bond with. He was the only Pokemon on my Ruby team that I ever gave a nickname, and that nickname was Grassy. Again, not great, but appropriate enough. Grass types are generally known for being rather slow and having shallow move pools, but Sceptile is pretty unique, able to learn a multitude of different attacks and being one of the fastest grass types out there. Because of this, I was able to use it very effectively. Grassy led me to victory countless times and was no doubt the star of my team. Now, some of you may think that this story has a sad ending to it, but that is definitely not the case here. It may have taken a while, but Grassy has been transferred from game to game, generation to generation, and as of right now, he's sitting comfortably in my Pokemon Y game, along with the rest of my team. And lo and behold, my favorite Pokemon ended up getting a Mega Evolution after all. While Fairies will push it around and Ice types are gonna have a field day with it, Dragon is the type that I long speculated and hoped Mega Sceptile would get. And coupled with its Lightning Rod ability, I think we have the definitive answer to shutting down stupid Rotom Wash! That is something I've wanted to see out of a Pokemon for a long time. And for that title to be given a Sceptile, I could not be happier. For all these reasons and many more, Sceptile is my #1 favorite Pokemon of them all. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and thanks for being really patient with me. I know I said I'd have this video out at the end of June, but, you know, things happen, and when you're writing about something you really love, you don't just want to half-heart it, you know? You really want to think about what you're saying. But with end slates, you can just freeball it if you want. Pokemonth continues sometime in July. I mean, there's no concrete date, but I want to get this done before July ends. But anyways, make sure you do what every video tells you to do, and I will see you all next time. Maybe even at Con Bravo? I'm gonna be there all 3 days. I'll make myself known.